Welcome to Tiffany Turned On. I'm your host, Tiffany Anton. I'm a psychotherapist specializing in sex and relationships, hoping to help you discover current topics in a fun, sometimes serious, and educational manner. I hope to help you get turned on to life as well as inside of your bedroom. Today, I am excited to introduce Natasha Wilson. When I heard she wrote a book called Slut, I had to learn more, and she mixed it with the word shame. Her book is Slut, letting go of shame surrounding sex and sexuality. Natasha, she's a psychotherapist, a sex therapist, and a life coach, so you know that we're connecting. While attending high school, their pronouns are Z and Zir. So when you hear me say that, you understand that I'm talking about this individual. While attending high school, Z began taking college courses in sociology at the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and that was at 96. So you know we both have some experience we've put under our belt. After graduation, Natasha attended Johns Hopkins University, completing a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Social Work at Wayne State University in 2010. Additionally, Z was a recipient of the Sally Foley Scholarship and completed a certificate in sex therapy and sexuality education at the University of Michigan. Go blue! I know, I lean toward the blue. Previously, Natasha completed a certificate in massage therapy at Irene's Massomassology Institute in 2008. In 2008, Z began a holistically focused practice called integrated wellness that centers awareness of connections between the physical, the emotional, and spiritual well-being in approaches to health and wellness. In this practice, Natasha offers psychotherapy and has contributed massage therapy to the practice for 15 years. Zir's approach to mental health blends an engagement of both allopathic and holistic approaches to treatment. Natasha offers classes, educational groups, including life coaching and private consultations, which means they can meet with you. Through Zir's work with people from various backgrounds, one of the most commonly experienced challenges have been related to sex, sexuality, and gender. Many clients have shared how they have been hurt and alienated from others due to feelings of shame, fear, and rejection. The motivation for Zir to write this text comes from a sincere belief that it's possible to be authentically yourself while still living a life that is full of joy and freedom from self-harming beliefs. The workbook, again, I want you to check out, is intended to be a guide through self-exploration and discovery that allows this to materialize in your life. Welcome, Natasha. Check out that fabulous bio you got here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
What it says at the end is to be a guide through self-exploration and discovery. Tell me more about that. How are you going to assist the listener or the reader in doing that?
Well, thank you. It's a complicated answer because everyone has different life experiences and influences that they have collected over the years and have created a worldview. And some of that is through our own learning and knowledge, but much of it is through how we were raised, the culture we grew up in, and how that culture is reinforced to us on a daily basis.
I've mentioned this on other podcasts. I didn't want to deal with our childhood shit because I had the attitude like it's over. And then I learned not only does it shape our behaviors, but it literally shapes our brain. The biological development of our brain and the patterns of our neurochemistry in that thought process. Your childhood shaped your brain, and some of those means that sucks. The importance of going back to your childhood to deal with the backpack of which all of us have.
One of the things I talk about in the book is how culture is so pervasive, we don't have an awareness of it. We walk through this world with plenty of assumptions that support a worldview that may not be accurate, and that includes how we see others as well as ourselves. In this book, we really take a very fundamental look at where do these beliefs come from? Are they helpful to you, harmful to you, and how might they be transformed?
Can you give me an example of the cultural beliefs that someone may integrate into their system of this is reality and their view of reality being counterproductive to who they are innately?
It's a great question. There's so many stories I can think of. Perhaps one of commonly experienced one might be an individual grows up in a pretty homogenous cultural background. Maybe they come from a rural area or someplace that just is more isolated from diversity. And then they go off to college and they are suddenly immersed in this world that contains a plethora of people and backgrounds and cultures. Then they are confronted with, well, I didn't know that. That's not what I thought was true, or that's not what I was told. And through that experience of interpersonal exchange, you develop an understanding that perhaps the world as I was presented wasn't quite accurate.
I had a big race shock. I was raised in a hometown, I'm just going to say white, white, and a little more white. I attended Ball State for my undergrad and began to meet a variety of people, which of course included African Americans. One of the gentlemen said to me, I think I was just a freshman, so that means 18. He said, Jesus is black. He said, Santa is black. Now, luckily, we have black Santas that are available in our Christmas decor and decorations. But that right there was so shocking. I felt like I needed to debate it. And I went into Jesus is white, and we know a little bit of the cultural, the cultural existence of that time and where he was born, and the making assumptions of the Middle East and the color of hair and skin and even facial structure. So I'm shocked by someone saying Jesus is black. No, white person here, never heard that.
No. And how was that for you to sort of disassemble that?
My first thought was, that's crazy. I
Yeah.
didn't have the social awareness, the maturity to understand diversity. And that's a perfect example of someone saying, no, this is another potential. And as you can tell, I still remember that how many years later? It was 1990.
So that's a perfect example of how our cultural awareness is based on a lot of assumptions. And once you start to question, that oftentimes leads to more questions. And this book really guides you through that personal exploration. There is no determined outcome. Wherever this leads you is where it is for you at that time. And the lack of judgment is essential to being able to really take this examination within the self, because judgment and shame come hand in hand, and that is a part of the confrontation.
Can you tell me a little bit more about shame, the difference between shame and guilt?
Yeah, I love Brene Brown. She does a great job of
Yes.
explaining that. So I will just lean into what I've gained from her. Guilt being what I've done is wrong, what I've done is bad, and shame being who I am is wrong and bad. If I is innately am bad and wrong, there's no redemption. This is the end. This is all that could be. But if I were to think about it in a different way, then there's a world of possibilities that allow for me to be a person who is in this world and is different but still valued.
Can you tell us about breaking down some of the chapters in your book?
Yes. So the book includes interviews with various people that I've met over the years, and they have graciously agreed to share their stories for the purpose of this book. That's really the most joyful part of this, has been able to really share people's experiences, because again, as a psychotherapist and someone who studies sociology and social work, I I have a concept of what culture could be like for another person, but I may never have that same lived experience. Being able to hear that in their own words and their own expressions, I found incredibly valuable.
Natasha, what is your identity? Cultural. I mentioned the pronouns of zir.
Yeah, so Zir reflects a genderqueer identity, and who I am on my surface is not really descriptive of who I am as a person in terms of internal identity and understanding of self. And that's a really tricky conversation for people to really understand, particularly if you're cisgendered. Cisgendered meaning that your sense of gender and identity is congruent with your physical form. If you've never confronted that essential truth as being having nuance, then someone saying that I am in a female body, but I don't experience the world as a feminine person
You were
is
assigned female at birth?
yes, yes. But that is as far as it goes, really. That as far as who I am as a person, this is just my meat suit.
Your meat suit. I love that. What about race? What about the community in which you were raised?
Sure. I'm Black and I grew up in mostly white suburban America. I went to private schools and um, my parents were college educated. I had a lot of privilege in terms of being able to, have access to education and extracurricular activities and, cultural enrichment that a lot of people don't have. But at the same time, I'm a person who is eagerly targeted in a crowd for discrimination.
What did you learn about your race? Being in a college educated home, being in a private school, and a private school with mostly white folk.
It took a lot of learning because as much as I understood racism and discrimination as a Black person in America, particularly a white America, you are still enculturated with whiteness and you are still bathed in the vestiges of white supremacy. That seeps into how history is taught. It's seeped into this discussion around it. And it even took really studying social work in Detroit to still disavow myself of some assumptions that had been in my consciousness without my awareness. I'm a Black person experiencing this. That means that if you are not a person of color, it takes a great deal of conscious effort to unwind and unravel that learning.
I have had people say to me, this is years ago, why do we even need BET television? Let's guess that you're in a culture and that is 99% of the shows that you're watching. How does that reflect you as a white person? So when you're white, you're kind of clueless as to all the whiteness that you're seeing on our televisions. BET is a small option for racial minorities. So what would that be like if BET was the only channel offered? There is not reflection. Listeners know I'm the queen of ADD, and what I did is say, tell me about your chapters, and then I jumped again it's because I was looking at the chapters and it said gender in there, and so then I'm like, Natasha, tell me about yours. Let's go back to the chapters.
We talk about getting ready for the work and practices in mindfulness and changing problematic thinking. This is based in cognitive behavioral therapy principles and also integrates sort of energetic awareness and philosophy of getting to use breathing techniques and grounding techniques to connect with yourself. And this is something that we're kind of programmed to not do. There's so many distractions that keep us from taking introspection into the self. This is a guide into doing that first because that is essential to understanding your own psyche, is to be able to be comfortable in your own body.
And regulating our nervous system. And it's when we're looking at this book, how do we prepare ourselves that we're going to be challenging all of these beliefs? We're going to have you peel down the layers. How can I do it in a way that my defenses are at least more minimized?
I ask for people to have curiosity. When a thought comes up, you're like, that just makes me uncomfortable somehow. Then be curious rather than being resistant to that. Thoughtfully, carefully, and say, well, why do you feel that way? Where did that come from? Do you really think that is true? Are there any parts of that that may not be true? Let's give more nuanced consideration to that.
All right.
We move into enemies of joy, happiness, great sex, and the beliefs that cause conflict.
There are enemies?
Yes.
What? You just labeled it. Yes. What are those enemies?
Well, there's trauma, there's loss, there's grief, there's belief systems that shame sexuality in particular.
We have a whole chapter of us being able to identify the enemies of happiness, joy, and great sex. And of course, Natasha and I are the opposite of enemies. We are advocates. We are cheerleaders. We're
Champions.
humans, maybe even mascots. I don't know what my mascot would look like. Now we're on to chapter 5.
But conflicting identities, beliefs, this comes from the concept of intersectionalities. People are more than two-dimensional. Even if you are a white person who grew up in middle America, you're heterosexual, cisgendered, and you are the model of what the society thinks you should be. And if you were to look around in all of your friends who share your same identity, it probably would be easy to think that you're different from those people, even though you're geographically, socially, every other demographic the same.
And
So,
when we think different than other people, then we go into the internalized shame of something is then wrong with me.
well, different is bad, different is wrong. But that is oftentimes the lesson that people are taught. And it comes from the beginning of life, from getting teased on the playground to what you might have heard in religious teachings to just even casual jokes. So you mentioned representation on TV. If you have been around, say in the 90s, there was a lot of casual racism and homophobia, and no one batted an eye. No one thought anything of it. They laughed along with it. And that is because there was no presentation that other people have humanity who are different and that perhaps their existence is not a punchline.
When I was younger, I enjoyed Hill Street Blues. And you know how we're streaming? Well, most of us are streaming. And I thought, oh, I want to check that out. I couldn't even finish episode 1. I was like, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
It was like offensive in every fourth sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was normative. So
I was clueless.
Of course. If that is your cultural upbringing, there's room for examination.
And chapter 6. I love this one.
Me too. Kink and fetish. The idea of being slut is a provocative word, and it's intentionally so.
I totally want to go to that one here in a little bit. I want like lots of time in discussing sluttiness.
Okay, we will come back to that. So, kink and fetish, oftentimes you think of as being a marginalized sexual activity or behavior. It's a spectrum of things. This is an exploration of how and why it could be enjoyable in terms of socially, biologically, and even in terms of the concept of we can be as adventurous as we're comfortable with ourselves being. If you remove shame from that, then, there's a lot to explore.
In that chapter, I highlighted a sentence. It says, what shame is not. It's not to experience the pleasures existing in your body.
I really do think there's virtue in hedonism. I think that if you are a person who has appreciation for the wonders of the world and a belief that there's a God that created all of this, then it would be quite restrictive to not enjoy, the gifts that you've been given, or to say that, well, only this section of gifts are appropriate, but not this other. Really, it's a matter of how do you live in a way that is attuned to your moral being, but is free to experience the wonders of the world in that human existence.
Chapter 7.
In the next chapter, queerness is oftentimes what people think of when I think of sexuality and alternative ways of being, but it's just a spectrum. There are 31 flavors of human sexuality, and this is a natural variation in the natural world. So queerness being rather than an aberration of sexuality, but is more of an expression of its diversity. Next comes up the intersectionality of race, sexual orientation, and gender. Again, taking a really granular look of what are the influences that shape our understanding of ourselves and others, and race being the most, prevalent of demographics in this country. It has not ceased to be relevant. And sexual orientation and gender, this is something that explores the internal identities. So you have both a external sense of identity, the ones that people can see when you're walking around the world. And then we have internal. So if I am a person who is struggling with gender and sexual orientation, how might that be complicated by social influence? And so this section of the book really takes a look at, again, those social constructs.
Number 9, that chapter 9 is a whopper.
It is. It is. We had to lead all the way up to get to this one. This is the church. In this book, I'm talking about the church being Christianity just because it is a point of reference, particularly to the United States, but is certainly not limited to Christianity. There are other, religious beliefs that have similar challenges of shaming sexuality. The church in this chapter is referring to the Christian church, but it talks about, again, how are these beliefs formed? How are they reinforced? And what harm is incurred as a result? Next, we have dismantling rape culture. So now that we've done this exploration of why do you think the way you do, how do you think the way you do, and then we come to what are you going to do about it? If you've discovered that I have accumulated some harmful beliefs that really are supportive of shaming and rape culture, and I no longer wish to have that as an influence in my life, this chapter talks about how that can be unraveled. And that's followed by ending legacies of shame, sexual shame. And that is looking at, well, now you've done this work of healing yourself from sexual shame. How do you not continue to perpetuate this shame onto others with your children, family, friends, whomever?
Like I mentioned before, I have love in God, society and socialization, self-love, purity culture, how to embrace the sexual self when you're from conservative families. The whole book is your passion.
Yeah, it is. I guess the passion really just becomes from personal freedom and self acceptance. And that is a very powerful force. And so when you are no longer abusing yourself with judgment, shame, guilt, then you are free to have more love for yourself and others. And I think that that ripples throughout society in small and big ways.
Love is such a big word. How would you break that down so we can
Yeah,
have a better understanding?
you ask great questions. And that's a good one because a lot of times people think of self care as candles and bubble baths and, spa days. And those
I
are
like
great.
those. Yeah,
I love
I'm going to
them.
say yes.
Every day of the week, I will say yes to that. But it is also the self care of, when you wake up in the morning and you pick up your phone, as we do, what do you choose to consume? How are you integrating society into your own psyche? So if you are consuming information that is judgeful, harmful, then it's very natural to think in that way about yourself. Part of letting go of feelings of judgment to the self is to consider how you might be doing that to others. When you start to change your own thought patterns of non-judgment, then it opens up more space for acceptance.
And thinking about the information that you're exposed to, my grandfather, goodness, he was in his 80s and was, I would consider, a fundamentalist Christian. He was listening to like a bunch of BS. He believed that the banks were going to close. So our family needed to buy kind of a fancy safe and withdrew money. I was just shocked. And I was like, well, Grandpa, that didn't happen. And he passed just 3 years ago at the age of 89. I was just shocked. How do you believe that the banks are going to close and you have to withdraw a significant portion of your money? And that was all influenced by information he was receiving on the TV and emails, radio. So by TV, radio, and emails he would receive. I had to tell Grandpa, take me off your email forwarding list because he wanted to forward this message. Beware, take care of your money. And it was all about his exposure because I had heard that from nowhere. So who we expose ourselves to can reiterate the messages that we believe.
And I think we have to be really savvy about that, particularly when it comes to algorithms, because it really can drive people down to dark rabbit holes. So you think that your grandfather is probably thinking, this is the absolute truth. Why don't people know this? And I'm doing a virtue by disseminating this information. And obviously that was misguided.
I've talked about having a 20-year-old son, and we were looking at my Instagram versus his Instagram and the algorithm that came out to that. It was a bit humorous. I have a fair amount of cats videos in mine. I like goats as well. His had zero cats and zero goats. It feeds the current belief, which one is, then we feel connected to other people. And we were just mentioning, though, the beliefs that could be harmful.
Yes. So it creates this echo chamber which reinforce our truths, whether they be true or not. So the harm in that is you have to stay curious. You have to be skeptical of even thoughts that you already believe. Be skeptical still.
My kid started listening to videos on YouTube, and I'm sure that someone important in his life shared that particular video. What I said to him is, I'm not a fan of radical on either end. I am a fan of scientifically proven information. I said to him, if you're going to listen to the radical right, I'd encourage you to listen to the radical left and see what is your middle. And I decided to listen to some of it because I said, share it with me. I chose the one that was more relevant to my passion. And it was this speaker talking about the fallacies of gender and sexuality. And this dude was saying that we provide mastectomies to 12-year-olds. Oh my God. I text my son and I said, are you ready for the mama's rebuttal? And what did I do? I got all research statistics. He replied back, I know. I'm just listening. I'm not saying that he's 100% right, but he was able to listen to my throwback. And I was talking about, of course, there aren't 12-year-olds getting mastectomies. And that if there is a choice of hormones, it has to come from a parent or identified caregiver to sign that. But just think about people who don't know. Then they think, my God, these stupid liberals are damaging our children without choice. And the other fear was that the left, so the political left, was trying to get rid of Christianity. So I did some statistics on that, of how many Christians there were, how much it reduced in the last 10 years, 50 years. And it was so minimal that they're giving these fear messages that Christianity is threatened when there isn't any background to it.
No, that's the greatest projection of the century. No, Christianity is not under attack. Extremists within Christianity are the ones attacking others who don't have power, representation, or the ability to defend themselves.
But he would believe that if he didn't have research that countered it.
Yes.
He would just think, he wouldn't challenge it. He would probably think, holy shit, okay, that's not cool. Look at what we're doing to our kids. We're making them gay. But that was a statement that he said. People are making them gay by giving them sex education. And again, this is my kid. I'm just shocked.
It's hilarious because it's like the only sex education out there is a heterosexual education, sex ed. There's states that don't even require that it be medically accurate. So of the paltry sex ed that's out there, it is solely heterosexually focused. Obviously, learning about sex didn't turn everyone gay. It didn't turn the gay kids straight, even though they learned only heterosexual edicts.
Well, I explored my sexual self, and kind of what I thought and what ended up happening was different. And my joke is, goodness, if I could choose my sexuality, why would I not choose these beautiful women with more emotional intelligence than my experience that I've had with dating men? And so he said, well, you can choose it. No, I can't. I can choose it as a BFF. I can choose it as some level of emotional intimacy, but I cannot choose my sexual identity.
Well, Grandpa, why don't you want to marry your buddy Bob, who wants to go hang out with you? He likes the things you like to do. You can kick back and drink beers and go fishing, and you don't have to do all that stuff you don't feel like doing. He doesn't care if your house is clean. Why don't you go marry Bob instead?
Yeah, and I believe that we do not have a cognitive choice of who we are sexually attracted to, want to be sexually with. We have a choice of our behaviors and how we respond to that. It is an innate part of who we are. So if it's an innate part of who we are, and God created us, and God is love, I think that all religions would believe that their God is love. How could God create all of these other humans with these different sexualities and gender identities? The other high horse I got on was about assigned male at birth. And of course, this guy didn't mention that at all. He said that it is driven, why he knows that's true, of the male or female dichotomy is based upon chromosomes. So I send the text talking about intersex chromosomes. We got science behind that shit.
And it's universal. It's not just in humans, it's in the animal kingdom. We are a part of the animal kingdom. It is a part of the natural variety.
Ooh, what kind of animals engage in homosexual behavior? And let me pause that one because I don't like the word homosexual. I think it's totally old school and has such a negative connotation. So I'm going to use it as gay behavior.
Actually, I'm not opposed to it because it is a fair description of what we think about sexual activity. You have people who are physically, who look different. The word hetero means different. Homo means similar. I think that it's really our value that's the problem. It's not the word itself. My 2 cents.
Just like the word queer had a negative connotation and now it's embraced by the society. Yeah. Like, I'm queer.
And so rather than this being a pejorative word that puts people down or makes them feel less than, it's become a reclamation of identity. And it's also a word that is quite favorable because it conveys that I enjoy things that are not strictly heterosexual, but it doesn't put a real definition beyond that. A lot of people find it comfortable because it gives them some wiggle room to discover themselves, to not feel like they are boxed into a category. So to that, I think our labels and identities are quite descriptive and empowering.
We need some level of labels to understand ourselves with linkage to other people, that we're not alone. And other people need labels, even though we tend to have more of a rebellion of labels right now. Well, I think we still need it to some degree.
I phrase it as this. People think of labels as being a restriction. I think of it simply as being a description. So that means that you can describe yourself with all of the words in the language that are available. So if one day I feel queer, the next day I'm really lesbian, or maybe I'm pan or bi or asexual, I'm trying to figure myself out. I have words that can describe that. This isn't something that limits my experience, but
when you and I were chatting prior to today's podcast, I really liked what you said about evolving and exploring in the labels. So if you start with one particular label and describing yourself to others, in our own exploration, both with our behavior as well as our thoughts, the label doesn't mean that it's concrete, that it's dependent upon these experiences.
I think even outside of sexuality, there's the understanding that if you live long enough, you're going to learn some things.
But I tell you what, we got some people out there that are so stuck on their beliefs that there is no.
That is true. That is not the ideal, however. Ideally, you're going to learn and grow throughout your life. And that means that your concept of self would naturally change. You don't see yourself ideally the same at 21 as 41 or 81. And that is expected and encouraged. So why not the same in terms of understanding yourself in terms of sexuality? So I may be born heterosexual and that didn't really change, but maybe I discovered that I liked kink. Maybe I discovered that I love more than one person. So even within the sort of safe space of mainstream accepted identities, there's room for nuance.
Natasha and I didn't quite formalize the chapters in the book. We talk about all of the topics, with the exception of chapter 11. I thought it would be beneficial just to cover them in particular. Chapter 1 is Getting Ready for the Work. Chapter 2, Practices in Mindfulness. Chapter 3, Changing Problematic Thinking. Chapter 4, Enemies of Happiness, Joy, and Great Sex. Chapter 5, Conflicting Feelings, Beliefs, and Identities. Chapter 6, Kink and Fetish. Chapter 7, Queerness. Chapter 8, The Intersectionality of Race, Sexual Orientation, and Gender. Chapter 9, The Church. Chapter 10, Dismantling Rape Culture. And Chapter 11, Ending Legacies of Change. It's a fairly short workbook, only 109 pages, which makes it so workable for you. To follow up on the discussion portion, I wanted to note a few things. And I think that it cut off a little bit in the recording when I discussed mastectomies for 12-year-olds. That is not happening in the U.S. I was wondering about intersex statistics and the prevalence of that in the United States. It looks like 1.7% of the population are born intersex with traits that do not fit the binary male or female sex in visualizations as well as reproductive anatomies. Mentioned also was animals and homosexual sex. What I found is 261 mammalian species have homosexual activity and courtship and pair bonding and parenting among same-sex animals. I talked about my grandfather and his somewhat bizarre beliefs. Like I said, the bank was closing, and that wasn't even during the 2000 scare that many people encouraged. I wondered about changing beliefs. Two main beliefs that come into my mind, of course, are religion and politics. Do people really change their mind? It seems that, according to the National Library of Medicine, it states that sexual attitudes do not exist in limbo. They are embedded in a larger belief system associated with specific hierarchies of values. In their study, if churches and other trusted and powerful social institutions are unwittingly fostering discrimination, that we can hardly expect imminent social change. The indirect effect promoting tradition, stability, and security is the perpetration of an unequal status quo. Do people really change religions? Do people really change political parties? As I check that out, only 4% of voters change from Republican to being Democrat, and only 5% of Democrats now call themselves Republican. This is often all linked with our moral system. Yet what about the top American values? And that, of course, is freedom, equity, and justice. I wonder how all of this plays into the messages of sexual shame. Do we have the freedom to express ourselves in consensual adult relationships? Do we have the freedom of identifying a sex of which we were not assigned at birth? Are we all equal? And is there justice when there is discrimination and crime toward the LGBTQI community? If you like this about what it means to be slutty, stay tuned next week for Sluttiness. The music for Tiffany Turned On is provided by Kumasi Afrobeat. You can find them online at KUMASIAFROBEAT.com. They are New Orleans' full Afrobeat band. They play to make you move. If you enjoyed today's episode, click, follow, like, give me a review. Did you know that books or items that I recommend in the podcast can be found on my website? Check me out. Watch my TEDx talk titled I Love Pleasure. It is all at neworleanssextherapy.com. Get turned on to life and in your bedroom.